Eddie Murphy's lackluster directorial debut in Harlem Nights led to a career slump in the late 1980s. The film's disappointing box office performance highlighted Murphy's reluctance to direct again. Despite the setbacks, Murphy's resilience and comeback performances in the 1990s solidified his box office standing. Like all bankable Hollywood stars who direct feature films, Eddie Murphy was given the chance to make his feature directorial debut because of his box office drawing power, which was virtually unparalleled throughout much of the 1980s. Indeed, his uninspired feature directorial debut, the 1989 crime-comedy film Harlem Nights, is emblematic of how he probably had too much power for his own good. By the late 1980s, the anarchic comedic presence that the actor displayed with his star-making performance in the 1982 buddy cop action comedy film 48 Hours was absent and replaced with cautiousness and predictability. Like other box office superstars who achieve a level of popularity that makes them seem commercially invincible, Murphy, instead of utilizing his box office capital to undertake more ambitious projects, focused primarily on preserving his star status by repeating himself. Listless, self-indulgent, and unfocused, Harlem Nights became a vanity project for Murphy, who fails to acquit himself well as the film's director, producer, star, or writer. Moreover, the commercial and critical failure of Harlem Nights heralded an extended career downturn for the actor, who didn't emerge from this slump until 1996, when the hit comedy film The Nutty Professor reminded audiences and critics of the awesome talent that made Murphy so much fun to watch in the first place. Eddie Murphy and Richard Pryor failed to click in Harlem Nights set in 1938 Harlem. In the aftermath of the Prohibition era, Harlem Nights stars Eddie Murphy as Quick, a former orphan adopted in 1918 by gambling operator Ray, played by Richard Pryor. In the film, Quick and Ray run a successful dancing and gambling club, which is targeted by gangster Bugsy Calhoun and crooked cop Phil Contoni. While Harlem Nights attracted publicity for being his feature directorial debut, the most notable aspect of Harlem Nights was supposed to be the historic star pairing of Murphy and his comedic idol, the legendary Pryor, whose emergence as a box office draw in the late 1970s and early 1980s paved the way for Murphy's ascendance in Hollywood. Harlem Nights was ideally supposed to be a passing of the torch film between Murphy, who was over 20 years younger than Pryor, and Pryor, whose career steadily declined throughout the 1980s. If Murphy and Pryor had worked together even 5 years earlier, this pairing probably would have had a momentous impact. Sadly, Pryor, who was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis in 1986, lacks the energy with which to serve as an effective counterpoint to Murphy. Pryor's frailness, first visible with Pryor in the 1987 comedy film Critical Condition, is plainly visible in Harlem Nights and is painful to watch. However, Harlem Nights is primarily undermined by Murphy's lackluster screenplay and uncertain direction. Like the dismal Prohibition-era film City Heat, Harlem Nights attempts to substitute antique cars and fancy period clothing for atmosphere and style, while gunfire is steadily employed to offset the film's inherent lack of pacing and suspense. Harlem Nights triggered Murphy's career slump. Released on November 17, 1989, Harlem Nights, Eddie Murphy's most expensive film to date, cost $30 million to produce. It finished its theatrical run with a domestic box office gross of nearly $61 million. Except for his 1987 stand-up comedy film Eddie Murphy Raw, this was the lowest domestic total for any of his 1980s starring vehicles, excluding the 1984 comedy film Best Defense, in which Murphy makes a glorified cameo appearance. While Harlem Nights was hardly a financial disaster for distributor Paramount Pictures, the film's disappointing box office performance heralded a steep decline in his career, especially in terms of his box office credibility, which was further strained between 1990 and 1995 by the disappointing films Another 48 Hours, Beverly Hills Cop 3, Boomerang, and Vampire in Brooklyn. Like other fallen box office stars, recalling Clint Eastwood's struggles in the late 1980s and Will Smith's commercial decline in the 2010s, his comeback was predicated on the need to simply appear in good films. His memorable performances in Bowfinger, Dr. Dolittle, and The Nutty Professor restored his box office standing by showing that he had recaptured his presumably lost form. Moreover, as the now 63-year-old Murphy has navigated subsequent down periods in his career over the past 25 years, his resilience has created an enduring bond between the actor and audiences, as evidenced by the powerful feelings of nostalgia that he generated with his long-awaited return to the role of Axel Foley in the Netflix film Beverly Hills Cop, Axel F. Murphy was embarrassed by Harlem Nights while Eddie Murphy undoubtedly had the power with which to continue his feature directorial career after Harlem Nights. The film's negative reception discouraged the actor, who has served as a producer on most of his movies over the past 30 years, from ever attempting to direct another film. Murphy, who purportedly conceived of Harlem Nights out of a desire to direct and star in a period film, has also criticized Harlem Nights, especially in terms of his much-maligned direction and screenplay. In a 1990 interview with Spin magazine, Murphy said, "It wasn't a pleasurable experience. I wanted to direct to see if I could do it, and I found out that I can't, and I won't do it anymore. The biggest thing is, I didn't enjoy doing it." The problem with Harlem Nights wasn't the directing as much as it was the writing of it. "I threw it together real quick." Harlem Nights is streaming on Paramount+. Eddie Murphy's latest film, Beverly Hills Cop, Axel F., is streaming on Netflix.